This is part 13 of Angular 2 tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss style binding in Angular with examples. Setting inline styles with style binding is very similar to setting CSS classes with class binding. Let's look at an example. I'm going to replace all these button elements with another button element, and let's use the style attribute to set the font color. Let's set font color to red. Let's run the application by pressing Ctrl F5. At the moment, we are not using any form of Angular style binding. Notice our inline style color red is applied to the button as expected. Now let's look at a simple example of setting a single inline style using Angular style binding. The first thing that I'm going to do is introduce a property within our AppComponent class. I'm going to name this property isBold. This is going to be of type Boolean, and let's set it to a default value of true. And to use Angular inline style binding within a pair of square brackets, we use the word style followed by that a dot, and then the inline style that we want to set. We want to set font weight inline style, and we want to bind this to this property isBold of our AppComponent class. If the value of this property is true, then we want to set font weight to bold, else we want to set it to normal. Let's save all our changes and reload our web page. Notice the font weight on the button is set to bold. To confirm this, let's launch Browser Developer Tools and inspect the generated HTML. So if you look at the button element right here, notice the style property. We have both the inline styles, color and font weight set as expected. Here is the example which we discussed just now. Keep in mind, style property name can be written either in dash case like this, or we can use camel case. So instead of using font dash weight like this, we can use camel case, font weight, and this should work exactly the same way as before. Let's save our changes and reload our web page one more time by pressing Ctrl F5. And notice font weight inline style is applied the same way as before. Some styles like font size have a unit extension. To set font size in pixels, for example, we have a slightly different variation of style binding. Let's look at that in action. First, let's introduce a property within our AppComponent class. I'm going to call it font size, and this is going to be of type number. Let's set it to a value of 30. Let's include two break elements after the first button, and let's make a copy of this button. And we want to bind this button to this font size property. So style dot font hyphen size equals our property name, which is font size. Now remember, we want to set font size inline style in pixels. So to the inline style, we append .px to denote that we want to set font style in pixels. Let's save our changes and reload our web page by pressing Ctrl F5. And if we inspect the generated HTML, notice for the second button, font size is set to 30 pixels as expected. Here is that same example. So far, we have seen how to set a single inline style. How about setting multiple inline styles? To set multiple inline styles, we can make use of the built-in directive ng-style provided by Angular. Using ng-style directive is very similar to using ng-class directive that we discussed in our previous video. So let's look at an example of that now. The first thing that I'm going to do is introduce a new property within our AppComponent class. I'm going to name it isItalic. Notice we have set a default value of true. And then let's add a function within our class. I'm going to call it addStyles. And within the function, let's create a variable. We are using JavaScript let keyword to create a variable. We can also use var keyword to do the same. There are several differences between let and var. We'll discuss those differences in a later video. For now, understand let is another way of declaring a variable in JavaScript. Let's name our variable styles. This object is going to contain key value pairs. Key is going to be the name of the inline style that we want to add, and the value is the value for that inline style. First, let's set font size inline style. So font hyphen size, we want to set font size in pixels, and we want to bind this to font size property of our AppComponent class. Next, let's set font style, and we want to bind this to isItalic property of our AppComponent class. If isItalic is true, then we want to set font style to italic, else normal. Let's set another inline style. Let's now set font weight, and we want to bind this to isBold property. If isBold is true, then we want to set font weight to bold, else normal. And finally, we want to return this object, styles. So return styles. And now let's include two break elements after the second button element. Let's make a copy of the button element, and we want to use the ng style built-in directive provided by Angular, and we want to bind that to this method. So within quotes, we specify the name of our function, which is add styles. So let's save all our changes and reload our web page. And if we look at the third button element, notice the font style is italicized, font weight is bold, and font size is also 30 pixels. To confirm that, let's look at the generated HTML for that last button. Look at that, font size is 30 pixels, font style italic, and font weight bold. Here is that same example. Thank you for listening and have a great day.